What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be updating my top 12 rookie running back rankings before the NFL draft. I'll obviously update them, post NFL draft, but heading into Thursday, this is how I'm looking at this running back class. Obviously, not a super stacked year at the running back position. It's very unlikely that we're going to get a running back in round one. We might only get a few, going on day two, probably a lot of day three guys, but there could still end up being some value in this class, and there are some interesting landing spots where these running backs could become very relevant for fantasy football. I'm also going to be splitting these running backs into tiers, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section, but let's just dive right into it. Starting off in tier one with my number one running back. I actually moved this guy up from my last video. It's going to be Jonathan Brooks. So he was my running back 2 in my last video I made. I've bumped him up here to number 1. And really the only main flag here for Jonathan Brooks is that he tore his ACL 10 games into the 2023 season. So he's probably not going to be 100% by the start of the 2024 season. But I still just think of all the running backs in this class, I feel like he has the best shot at being a true 3-down workhorse in the NFL. So I'm willing to, take some risk with him coming back from injury, maybe not being 100% of his true ability in year one, but I think long term he can definitely pay off. He's also still only 20 years old, so very, very young. He's going to have a lot of tread left on the tires. He's 6 foot tall, around 210 pounds. He's a dude who had a year 3 breakout, so not much production in year 1 and year 2, which typically isn't great, but he was playing behind Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, so that's pretty much like the best excuse you can get. There was no shot he was playing over Bijan, and then Roschon Johnson, a few years older than him, definitely would have had the edge to be the running back 2. So he was just a part of a very, very talented running back room at Texas. But in his junior year, in the 10 games he played, rushed for over 1,100 yards, caught 25 passes for 286 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. He's a very strong runner, can also catch passes. So I do think he possesses that 3-down skill set, and that's why I have him here as my running back 1. Now my other tier 1 running back is going to be Trey Benson, and he originally was my running back 1. Still very in on him, but I did just swap those two. He has a pretty well-rounded profile, strong production in his sophomore and junior seasons. 2022, rushed for almost 1,000 yards, caught 13 passes for 144 receiving yards, scored 9 touchdowns. Pretty similar rushing production in 2023, but he upped his receiving usage, 20 receptions for 227 receiving yards, scored 15 total touchdowns. One potential red flag here for Trey Benson was that he never handled a massive workload in college. He averaged around 12 carries a game in both 2022 and 2023. It's not super common to see someone have a somewhat limited workload in college and then transition to the NFL and all of a sudden become a workhorse. So I think that's where he may be capped ceiling-wise. But I think in general, there's not a ton of 3-down workhorses in this class, so it's not a huge deal, and that's why I still have him in tier 1. Solid size, 6 foot tall, 216 pounds, ran a sub 4.40, so great to see there. And then he currently has the second highest odds to be the running back 1 off the board. It does look like Jonathan Brooks has the best shot to be the RB1 in the draft, but Trey Benson right behind him there to be the top guy. So now shifting into tier 2, going to start off with Jalen Wright as my running back 3, and he's a dude who just consistently upped his production in all 3 of his college seasons, and overall just had a very impressive 2023, pretty much all throughout his production on the field, through his combine numbers, really just killed it in his last season. So he rushed for over 1,000 yards at 7.4 yards per carry, which is crazy. Also added 22 receptions for 141 receiving yards, so showcased that receiving upside. He had 4.35 yards after contact per attempt, which is crazy. He had 52.1% of his rushing yards on breakaway runs, which is great to see. He was ripping off, big plays at a very high rate. 5'11", 210, ran a 4.38 40, also jumped really well. So he killed it in his junior season, tested incredibly well. He's a great athlete, so I think he'll probably find himself getting picked somewhere on day 2, and we'll just see where that landing spot is. Now after Jalen Wright, going with Blake Corum. Some people might have him higher. I do have him pretty firmly here in this tier 2 area. And he was Michigan's lead back for his last 3 seasons. In 2023, he rushed for over 1,300 yards, 27 total touchdowns, which is just a wild number. But the one thing we want to point out here is that he tore his meniscus at the end of the 2022 season. And so even though he had some good counting stats in 2023, the touchdowns were there, the total yard number was nice, his efficiency really did fall off in 2023. But I think it's probably reasonable to expect that he bounces back A full year removed from that meniscus injury. Maybe he's not 100% of what he was, but I do think we'll see an uptick because he was a fairly efficient running back in his first 2 years as the lead back. It took a big hit in 2023, but I think it can bounce back, and he currently has the third highest odds to be the running back one off the board. I think he's around plus 400, so he's probably going to get day 2 capital, and I think he is just in a good spot here as my running back 4. And then my final tier 2 running back is going to be Marshawn Lloyd. And Lloyd really does not match the production of any of the running backs ranked ahead of him, especially guys who had production in multiple years. But there's a decent explanation for it. So he tore his ACL before his freshman season. Then he didn't do much in year 2, which makes sense because it was pretty much like his real freshman year, and he's coming off an ACL. As a junior, he rushed for a little under 600 yards in 9 games, but caught some passes, 18 receptions, 176 receiving yards, 11 total touchdowns. And then his best year came in year 4, where he played in 11 games, rushed for a little over 800 yards, caught 13 passes for 232 yards, 9 total touchdowns. He was definitely breaking off big plays at a high rate. Almost 57% of his rushing yards were on breakaway runs, 5'9", 220, ran well with a 4.46. So as long as he's getting, day 2 capital, I think he'll probably remain in this tier. And then shifting into tier 3, this is the area where draft capital is going to be a big deal for these guys, and they all have some pretty clear red flags. So we're going to start off with my running back 6, Audric Estime, and the huge red flag here was his 40 time. He ran a 4.7 140 at the combine, which is bad. That might end up tanking his draft capital, which could lead to me dropping him. Like if he's now slipping to round 5, round 6, that's obviously not great, but if he can sneak in on day 2 or go like round 4 area, that would be fine. But really everything outside of that 40 time is pretty solid about his profile. He's a big dude, 5'11", 221. He had a year 2 breakout and then a big junior season. Played in 12 games, rushed for over 1,300 yards, 18 total touchdowns, and then he caught all 17 of his targets for 142 receiving yards. He's also still very young, only 20 years old, great after contact, 4.27 yards after contact per attempt, and even though he didn't run well, he still had 44% of his rushing yards on breakaway runs, which isn't up there with some of the top guys in this class, but it's still a very impressive number and is a lot more than some of the other running backs we're going to see in this tier. So when we're actually watching him play, he doesn't look like a 4.71 running back. So if the NFL kind of agrees with that, hopefully it won't tank his draft stock because I do like him here as my running back 6. Then behind him, I moved Bucky Irving up 1 spot from my last set of rankings. And obviously, his red flag was also his athletic testing. It was bad. We knew he was going to be undersized, came in at 5'9", 192, but then he ran a 4.5, 540, which for that size is a pretty rough time. He also jumped poorly, so he didn't really make up for it anywhere else in terms of the combine metrics. And in general, there's just not a lot of undersized running backs in the NFL who also aren't pretty strong athletes. He didn't rip off breakaway runs at a high rate. Less than 40% of his yards were on breakaway runs in all 3 of his college seasons. He actually was pretty good after contact, which is something you wouldn't expect given his size. So that's, I guess, a bright spot. The other main problem here with Bucky Irving is that he's just not a good pass blocker, which could really limit his usage, especially on 3rd down, which is where I think he would have a lot of usage because he is such a strong pass catcher. So I do think Bucky Irving kind of boom bust. I feel like his floor is very, very low. There are running backs ranked after him that I may be more confident could find a role somewhere. If Bucky Irving was just not getting any playing time, I wouldn't be shocked. But I also think in the right situation, he could definitely become fantasy relevant. He had great production in college. We know he can catch passes. If he's not asked or if he could improve on his pass blocking, I think he could definitely find a decent role on an NFL roster. Now, sticking around in Tier 3, the guy swapped with Bucky Irving. It's Braylon Allen. And he started off his college career, at a crazy high level. As a freshman, he was Wisconsin's clear running back 1 as a 17-year-old. That's insane. He rushed for over 1,200 yards that season, 12 touchdowns on 6.8 yards per carry. So originally it looked like this dude was just going to be an absolute stud. He was probably going to be the top running back in his class when he hits the NFL draft. And in that season, he also averaged 4.48 yards after contact per attempt. 48% of his rushing yards were on breakaway runs. So all around, it was just great. He's 6'1", 235, a huge running back. The problem is he pretty much regressed in every area after that freshman season. Aside from his receiving usage, he caught 28 passes in 2023, but for only 131 yards and had a pretty low 0.73 yards per route run. So I don't think he's going to be used as a receiver at the NFL level. So he regressed in a lot of areas. He also never tested for the 40 despite being healthy, which isn't a great sign. It seems like he knew that time was not going to be good and he just preferred to not put it out there, which is probably smart, but trying to analyze him as a prospect and as an athlete, it does make it a little bit tougher. He could have been in like that Audric Estime 4.7 territory. So I'm just not sure where his actual upside is going to be if he's not ripping off big runs, if he's not catching passes. Like maybe he's more of like an early down bruiser, but I do just think the ceiling's kind of capped there. We'll see how the NFL views him though. I could see them being much higher on him than me, because he was a highly touted guy of high school, early producer at Wisconsin, produced in 3 seasons, so maybe he ends up going day 2, and I definitely could move him up with the right landing spot, but pre-draft, not a huge fan. And then the final running back in this tier is going to be Will Shipley out of Clemson. He was a 3-down back and produced in all 3 seasons in his time at Clemson. 5'11", 206, ran a 4.42, so solid athletic testing, checked those boxes. And I do think he's probably going to get decent draft capital. I think his realistic ceiling at the next level is probably a guy who's getting a lot of work as a receiving back and then mixing in on early downs. I don't know if he has that full, 3-down workload skill set, because as a runner in college, he wasn't great. He wasn't good after contact. He struggled to force missed tackles, and then he also wasn't ripping off chunk plays at a super high rate, but he did catch 30 passes in both his sophomore and junior seasons. So like I said, I think he could find a role. If he can blend the receiving usage with some sort of role on the ground, I think he could be a decent fantasy option. Now pivoting into tier 4, my running back 10 is going to be Dylan Laube, and I just think in a class with a limited number of 3-down skill set running backs, I'd rather just take a swing here on someone who I know is elite in one specific area, and Laube has a crazy receiving production profile over his past 2 seasons. In 2022, he caught 49 passes for 474 receiving yards, and then in 2023, he caught 68 passes for 708 receiving yards. It is so rare to find that type of receiving production from a college running back, but he did it. And so even if he's not going to be a 3-down guy, be a workhorse at the NFL level, that's not what we're going to be finding in this territory of running backs, but it is just tough to see him not finding a role as a pass-catching back at the NFL level. So that's why I have him here as my running back 10. My RB11, Isaiah Davis, I talked about him in my last video. He was my running back 10 out of North Dakota State. And what I like about Isaiah Davis is that we have a connection with him playing with an NFL caliber running back while being younger and still being very productive. So he was in the same backfield as Pierre Strong, who was a 4th-round pick to the Patriots in 2022. And as a true freshman, Isaiah Davis outproduced him while also being way more efficient. Pierre Strong was 3 years older than Isaiah Davis, was an NFL caliber running back, and Isaiah Davis was outproducing him. And then Davis only played 7 games in 2021, but he kept pace with him production that year. Then Pierre Strong goes to the NFL, and over the next 2 seasons, Isaiah Davis rushes for over 3,000 total yards, catches 44 passes for 372 receiving yards, and then he tested fine, 6 foot 218, ran a 4.57, so not crazy fast, but for 218 pounds, that's a fine time. If I have to throw a late round dart on one of these day 3 guys, I'm definitely going to be interested in Isaiah Davis. And then my final running back here, RB12, it's going to be Ray Davis, wrapping up tier 4 here. So we actually played at 3 different schools, started off at Temple, I believe we played 2 seasons there, then 2 seasons at Vanderbilt, and then finished up in 2023 at Kentucky. And he put together a really, really strong 2023 season. It was his best season forcing tackles, getting yards after contact, and breaking off big plays, and also by far his best receiving season, 32 receptions for 324 receiving yards, 1.28 yards per route run. So I think it'll be interesting to see where he gets drafted. I could see him going early day 3, maybe a team surprises us and gets him before that, but I don't think he's going to be going late day 3 or, having a risk of being undrafted. I think his draft capital is probably going to be better than the 2 running backs ahead of him in this tier, but we'll see how it shakes out. So let me know how you guys are feeling about these rankings. Which running backs do you have higher or lower? Excited to see where these guys land in the NFL draft. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.